Hi everyone, I'm Dynasty.
And I'm Charles, and welcome to Mental Health in the Hood.
And this is the Mental Health Show.
Good job.
All right.
Right.
Okay, so this is going to be season 2, psychological and emotional trauma. This is episode 2, learning to live authentically as an LGBTQ immigrant Latino American. So today we have a special guest in the house. All right.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yes, Ali. So Ali is a colleague and friend of mine. He graduated from Long Beach University with a Master's of Art in Education. He's currently a high school teacher who teaches world history, U.S. history, Gov, and Econ. Wow.
It's a mouthful. Yeah.
Wow.
I
see you came pretty relaxed today, huh?
Yeah, I do want to explain this a little bit. I apologize for not dressing up more, but I definitely wanted to portray and my true self, which is this. If I'm not teaching, this is what I'm wearing, and D knows this. Every PD I come in wearing my tank top and my board shorts. Simply because, I feel as a immigrant Latino American, as an LGBTQ American, I want to definitely let people know it could be the person next door. Everybody goes through everything. And,
Right.
you don't have to have a hyper career or be in school to not experience mental health. Everybody goes through it. And I just want to let you all know I'm a regular guy and we all go through stuff. And, hopefully we could learn about each other. And I could share my story with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's right.
All right, so we have our shout outs and celebrations.
Okay, yes.
Shout out to celebrations. So we always want to show love before we get started on the show. So the first and foremost, we want to thank Maka. She was our previous guest on episode 1 for season 2. She came and told her stories about the struggles of battling with the mental illness and being high functioning. So we want to thank her for coming by. We also want to thank everyone who came to our Zoom meetup that happened on Wednesday, August 5th at I think it was 7 o'clock Pacific Standard Time.
Yes.
I always get that mixed up.
It's okay.
So, Dad, how did you feel about the topic of neighborhood characteristics and depression?
Oh, it brought out a lot of insight, in awareness and things like that. I'm so proud of the people who attended, who opened up, shared their stories, and we helped each other out. That was the main thing of the topic, just to bring awareness and support. The number one thing with me is support. So thank you everyone for showing up. We believe in you, and we look forward to continue our Zoom meetings here on and forever, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Forever and ever. All right. So we also want to thank everyone who's been following, liking our photos, subscribing to our mental health show. This is an everyday people show. We cannot do this work without you, and we're so thankful that you guys have joined us along this journey. So before we tap into the episode, we always want to provide some form of education. What is psychological and emotional trauma? So, Ali, I'm just going to throw us off base for a minute, right?
Please go.
When you hear psychological and emotional trauma, what does that mean to you?
For me, that means a traumatic past experience that has a lasting effect on your mental health.
Okay, well, you hear it.
Yes, he did.
Ali said it, and I think the word that stood out for me is lasting, because it can happen to anybody, and there is no limit of how long that can be for that person.
Exactly.
So psychological and emotional trauma is damage or injury to the psyche after living through an extremely frightening or distressing event, and may result in challenges in functioning or coping normally after the event. While each person who experiences a traumatic event will react differently, many do recover well with the proper support system and do not experience long-term problems.
Right.
So, all right. So I think now we can jump into the interview and get straight to the meat and potatoes of this
The meat
session.
potatoes. You
You
always
already
say
know,
that.
meat potatoes, the real meal, the real deal.
Ali, it's good having you here today.
It's good being here.
We're going to have a few questions. Just be relaxed. Just listen to the questions. Take your time to answer. And we here with you for support, man. So one of my first questions is, what are some important issues affecting immigrant Latino Americans in our communities? Immigration, economics, instability, language, and barriers.
Gosh, we could spend all day talking about just one of those, but I do want to touch base on just the immigration part and just the trauma surrounding that experience. Because what I think as Americans, we get so used to this word immigration, that it just becomes a word, we don't really get to process what goes behind it. So in my family's experience, my father was a successful mechanical engineer in Mexico. We had our own house. We were not rich, but we were happy. Everybody had their own room.
Right.
And then out of nowhere, we are in a situation where we're living, with 4 other families under one house. All of us share one room. My father's steady job is no longer steady. He's working a 9 to 5. My mom no longer has the time to stay and raise us at home. She's got to work. Who's watching the kids now? Well, auntie and grandma and everyone. Right. So there's already a disconnect already. Yes. We can talk about the trauma that will unfold there from children being separated from their parents, yes. After having them at home for a while. Parents going through the trauma of having earned a living to no longer earning a living, yes. Right? And then you get all that anxiety built in on top of the anxiety of every other family in that house.
Right.
And there's no one to talk to about it because the adults don't talk about it. We Latinos, we tend to bottle things up and keep it here. We don't express it unless it's in the form of an outburst.
Right.
So
I can relate. Yes.
So that already, that starts kind of to turn, the pot for, per se, of a catalyst of more trauma. And I think for the Latino community, one of the things that we're known for is corporal punishment, and that is, that is traditional. Unfortunately, we have to speak the truth. But then you get that traditional, corporal punishment, and then you add that hyper anxiety and that hyper traumatic experience of immigration, right. And that kind of up against the wall feeling of there's nowhere to turn. Right. And I was talking to Dee about this the other day on the phone, where when I started to process my physical abuse from not just my parents, but from all the adults in the house, right? You start to understand the whys behind that behavior. Right. Because, for so long, part of my process was letting go of the anger, of the hurt, of the turmoil against my parents and other adults that inflicted that corporal punishment on me. I had to understand the why. And part of the why is that they didn't have an out. Right. They didn't have a way to process their everyday. Right. And mind you, we're just talking about the macro. Another thing I shared with Dee was that my mother never talked about the physical and sexual abuse she experienced as a young Latino immigrant American woman, never mind being a Latina Mexican woman in Mexico. There's a lot of abuse there, right? So when you don't have a channel to process that, you're gonna take it out on the kids. Yeah. Hell, you might take it out on the dog.
Exactly. I like how you said the understanding, because once you understand, right, that's part of healing.
Yes.
Right. Now you can see what's going on, and then you don't tend to take it so personal. Mm-hmm. Right. So I like that, man. I like how you put that out there.
Thank you, and I appreciate you pointing that out because it affected me for a long time. And it took a lot of intervention for me to be where I am today. And part of that intervention happened at Rise. Working at Rise High School, it was a hard moment for me to have to sit myself in the mirror and say, you got to work through this if you actually want to make a difference in these kids' lives. Because if you're being triggered left and right by their behavior because of things you have not processed, how are you going to help them?
You bringing a good energy.
Yeah, you bringing in a good energy.
Yes,
and I think the other thing is, like, when you guys talk about that understanding, when we're children, adolescents, we don't really understand the reasons why our parents do the things that they do. Right. We don't understand, and we can't conceptualize their trauma and why they respond to us the way that they do, or why they treat us the way that they do. And as you grow up, you become part of their healing, because they one day learn that they can tell their child, this is what mom and dad experienced. And I think as we grow up, a lot of our parents feel like some information is not for us to know. Yeah. Because they're like, it might hurt you, or maybe too much for you to think about, and you shouldn't have to worry about it. Yeah. And then it's a certain age where it's not about me worrying about it, mom, or me worried about it, dad. It's part of helping me, because I need to understand what is happening.
And understanding is education.
Mm-hmm. And it's intergenerational. Like he said, it's so many generations. So we're mad at our parents for things that have happened to them. The same thing with me and you have experiences that we think that it's our parents, but it's from other parents and their parents. And it's like somebody has to stop the cycle. And I think now we're living in that time and generation where we are now talking about it and getting rid of the stigma. That is the point of the mental health show. Okay, Ali, my second question is, what are some of the cultural stigmas associated with being an LGBTQ immigrant Latino American male?
Well, that is a mouthful, but let's focus on the LGBTQ part for a little bit. And gosh, what stigmas aren't there? Mexican Latino Hispanic culture as a whole tends to be hyper masculine, machismo, where the expectation for all boys is to grow up liking girls, having girlfriends, slaying, eventually marrying, and having a bunch of kids. That's what was expected of me. And as a kid growing up, knowing that I was different, knowing that I did like boys, knowing that I didn't necessarily always like girls that way, I knew I had to make a choice. And for the longest time, my choice was I'm going to end up being that person, that hyper masculine Hispanic person. And I lived it out. That was part of the trauma, is living that out, faking it till you make it almost.
Yeah.
Right? Fake it till you make it.
Yes.
And this constant fear of coming out, of being told that you're different, of being called, every horrible name. I won't say it on here because we've all heard them, right? And just really being denied your identity.
Right.
So, that stigma of disappointment and, is really hard. And it's very traumatic, at least it was for me. And I can speak for various others that I've interviewed myself among the same topic, that it is detrimental because you're essentially denying yourself. I mean, you're you. Your actual you,
right?
You're denying it, and I don't mean just like the physical aspects of it, but like the actual the you that is inside.
Emotional person,
exactly,
because his emotions connected to that.
That is correct,
right.
And one of the funny things Dee mentions sometimes, and it's like I'm very boisterous in the classroom, and I'm very like singy-songy, and I jump and I dance and I do accents, and hell, sometimes I'll wear high heels if the kids like do certain things, you get 5 assignments in a row, you have perfect attendance, sure, I'll pop on the high heels, those are things I could never have imagined doing when I was a kid,
right.
And that was definitely an uptight child. I was definitely like very, very depressed, very because I had to keep myself in a little box,
right.
And in the Hispanic culture, what's going to happen if my parents find out?
Yes.
Heck, I'm going to get my butt beat. I'm going to get punished. I'm going to get made fun of. I'm going to get ostracized. There's so many ifs that it has like I said, it has that lasting impact. That's just like another layer of trauma that you have.
Man, that's a whole lot of trauma. A whole lot of trauma. How old were you when you just realized and told yourself, I'm just going to live to be me and do the things that I want to do?
Oh my gosh, that it has been a process. I'm 32 years old, y'all. I did not come out to my parents till I was 30.
Wow.
30.
Wow, so 2 years ago.
2 years ago. 2 years ago. And it's funny, it happened almost out of necessity. We'll talk about that here just because it's not relevant, but
right.
That's a long time to hold something that important from your parents.
Exactly.
Now that doesn't mean I was closeted to everybody in my life.
And that's important to you.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a process. I don't think I started living my true self till Rice. Our good colleague Spencer, shout him out. He once told me, Ali, the best thing you can do for your students is to be your true self. Be your authentic self.
That's right.
Like your true self.
That's right.
And that's the topic of this episode.
Yeah.
Living authentically.
Yeah, living authentically. Okay.
Right. Okay. So now that my dad is going to go to the next question.
Yes. Did you have anything else?
No, I was going to ask another question, but I think we're going to ask that already. So I told myself I'll pump my brakes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have another question for you, Ali. Okay, what coping strategies did you use, and how did it help you?
Well, I do want, if it's all right with you guys, I want to address the unhealthy coping strategies and then how that transformed into healthy coping strategies.
Go ahead.
But yeah, I mean, as part of, again, layering that Latino Hispanic culture on top of the stigma of being gay, how did you cope with this as a kid? Well, as a young kid, before I had, you would say like freedom, social freedom to like go out and do things, I had no coping mechanism besides music and sports, in high school. And that worked for a while until you got to college, you're living independently, and all of a sudden support systems that were there are no longer there. So how do you cope? You drink, you experiment with drugs, you act out violently towards yourself and towards others. And again, like those are all coping mechanisms, but not exactly healthy ones.
They're negative.
Right, negative. Especially when I started coming to terms with who I am, and you start to question, like, is this a lie? Is this not a lie? You don't want to feel any of that, especially when all those years of trauma come coming back. That's what led me to really unhealthy alcohol use, really unhealthy drug use, really unhealthy withdrawals from my friends and family, right? And it took a really long, hard drop. Like smack in that ground face first for me to like wake up and realize I'm either gonna have to make a change, or I'm gonna eventually just die, because that's the path I was taking.
And that's, I'm glad that you pointed that out, because just with the alcoholism, the drugs and things like that, it pounds them emotions, right, in a negative way. It don't allow you to be free and live. You know, your emotions just stay bottled up and things like that, and you can't. It's almost like you can't breathe. And then when you finally do exhale, it's exhaling in anger. You know, so I understand where you're coming from.
And thank you for that, because for a long time I thought that experience was just my own. I thought I was alone.
No, you're not alone.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think too, just hearing the fact that you did experience it, but you didn't become dependent on it. I think that's where substance abuse happens, is when we become dependent on that.
Right.
And we bottle our emotions into a bottle, into a bottle of alcohol. We bottle our emotions into any other drug that we're using. And I think a lot of people can attest to that. They're probably not going to be honest about it, but a lot of people can attest to that, from all different ethnicities, because it's something that is around in our community. So now you talked about some of the unhealthy coping strategies. What are the ones that you're using now that are helpful to you?
Yeah, and I just want to speak this out before anything. Like, everybody has a different coping mechanism, healthy mechanisms, and what works for one person might not work for other. And so my coping has started from the age of maybe like 25 to now. I've been kind of progressing through different ones. The first being what I like, I don't call it, but it's called metacognitive self-therapy, where you actually speak to yourself. I know people are like, that's just crazy. Why would you talk to yourself? But it's true. It's like, if I'm sitting in in a situation where I have to really assess my own anxiety, what's going on, I have to talk to myself. Okay, what are you feeling anxious about? What is triggering you right now? And then you either go, could I identify it? Yes or no. If I can't identify it, then I'm gonna, do a healthy activity. What is a healthy activity that you can do right now that's not picking up that bottle, that's not going to that drug, that's not doing something catastrophic or unhealthy? Pick that activity until you can allow yourself to process it. Otherwise, if you know what triggered you, then let's analyze why it's triggering you. Right? For me, especially in the classroom, since, that's where Dia and I met, at the very, very beginning, if, a certain word a student used, and I'll say the word now, but it's like if somebody said the word fag, out loud in class, that would trigger me. Right. Now, why would that trigger me? That's a very violent word used against me many times. That word is associated with violence. It's associated with physical, emotional trauma. It's been inflicted on me. But it's like, why did that hurt me? Because I hadn't come to terms with myself. Because I still wasn't aware of who I was and comfortable with it. I still hadn't actually talked to anybody about that trauma that I faced, and been able to experience acceptance and I guess follow through on who I am as a person. Right? So once I was able to process that, anyone could say it, and I won't be as triggered as I used to be. Right? And again, it took going to counseling. It took going to a psychologist. It took going to a psychiatrist. And I speak all these, physicians as if, I was like the next, celebrity, be able to afford it. And not everybody can. Right. And I was blessed enough that I could do it in college, where, you have mental health services, and it was becoming a thing when I got my BA. And I was introduced to these coping strategies. Now fast forward to Rise. I meet Dynasty, I meet Shannon, I meet Cherokee, I meet all these beautiful mental health specialists that taught me more strategies. Right? Take a step back.
Yes.
Think before you talk. Think before you act. Right? When we talk about Rise and how trauma is a big, trauma-informed learning and teaching is huge, I have to take a step back every single day when I talk to anyone and just think, whatever might put me off about a person, right? That's either my trauma or their trauma.
Well, you know what? That was going to tap into the next question. I was just about to answer it. So now that you talked about that and how that also looks different in your classroom, because trauma-informed classrooms is also new to our society. It's not saying that it did never exist, but now a lot of schools and a lot of classrooms are trying to implement trauma-informed practices. So in your work as a history teacher, how has trauma impacted the way you philosophize your teaching practices?
Great question, and it is at the forefront. Trauma-informed practices they're the very first thing I step to when working with students, when teaching. All of my pedagogical practices begin with trauma-informed training, outlooks, practices, processes. Why? Simply because behavior is language. It is literacy. And so when you're looking at adverse behavior from a student, it's not the behavior itself that you should be focusing on, it's the why behind it. We spoke of the whys a little bit earlier, but that's really key to being effective as an educator. If you're not, you can't put yourself in a position where you're trying to understand the behavior in order to interact with the students so that it happens less in a positive way. You're going to be hitting a wall forever. And one thing that I haven't spoken of that I really want to bring to light as far as being trauma informed and being a teacher is that I had to choose to be vulnerable with myself. I call it introspective vulnerability, meaning you're looking inside yourself and figuring out why things are the way they are with you. Why do they bother you? And I spoke earlier of recognizing my own triggers in order to be an effective teacher, and that's the key. Because if I see my students as problem students, then I'm not really a teacher, right? Because the problem isn't the students, the problem is with me, if that's the way I'm looking at it. And that's how I used to. There was one point in my career as an educator when that's what I did. That's what we're taught to do, actually. I want to bring that to light, people. Teachers are taught to look at behavior as problems. We use that word in my classes. Oh, what about problem children? What about this? What about that? And they teach you to get control. The idea is control, and it's like, no, we got to do the opposite. And so what I appreciate about what I do now is that it's about letting go of control and going to understanding. You got to understand.
Exactly.
And one of our colleagues says this all the time too. I'm shouting all y'all out. Scott always says, the students won't care what you know until they know that you care. And if a student sees that you care enough to figure out why they're flipping you off every morning and flipping a desk over, if you figure out why, and try to help them through that why, they're going to eventually learn that you're not there to do the opposite, but help them.
And there's also a reason why.
Exactly.
There's a reason why people act out certain behavior.
Exactly. Yeah. And one of the things that that I try to teach, if we're talking about trauma informed, is to have the students learn how to communicate where they're at. How do they communicate where they're at? It doesn't, and it's like I said, it's a vulnerable thing to speak of these things. So, maybe my mom beat me in the morning. Maybe I didn't have anything to eat. Maybe I stayed up all night taking care of someone. Maybe I just got off work. There's so many things, and you don't talk about it, so therefore you don't process it. So, and all of the teachers that I work with at RISE do something similar where we allow our students a way to tell us what's going on. Either you're going to circle a happy face or a sad face or an face to tell me what mood you're in, or you might have a space to tell me, hey, I'm going through this, or you might just, hey, can I go to MHT? Sure, go see Dynasty,
Can I take a break? Have a tough day?
Learning how to communicate, because everybody goes, like I said, everybody goes through everything. We just don't talk about those things. So learning how to do that, and again, understanding is key.
And that is key, because I remember when I used to go to school, man, I used to be scared to speak out. Even if I knew the right answer, I used to be scared to thinking I was going to be wrong. It was just really something, but I knew how to go out to the streets and act a fool and put my angers out to the community. So, man, y'all doing a great job, man. Okay, that leads me into my next question that I have for you, Ali. And my next question is, what are some ways that mental health agencies can improve service for Latinos, LGBTQ youth?
If I may, I wasn't, I didn't really think this through when I was talking, but I don't think this is a bubble that should just go through LGBTQ Latino immigrant youth. It should be everybody.
There you go.
Everybody. Everybody needs mental health. And the funny thing is, like, those agencies need to be put in the classroom. We need to get mental health in the classrooms. Right. I'm not talking about one mental health counselor for 3,000 students in a school. Right. No, I'm talking about 1 per 10. Gosh, if we had that kind of funding, right?
I was going to say, I don't think every school has that type of money just to be like mental health people.
Right, but I mean, if we're talking about a wish list and what I think could help and would help, it's that.
Exactly.
It's that. And when we're talking, going back to being immigrant, Latino, Hispanic, LGBTQ, and Dynasty touched on this too the other day when we were talking, when she mentioned, and I honestly, Dynasty, to be truth, I never thought about that way either, but it's like, because our community comes in a bubble called illegal, a lot of it, we don't seek those services out for fear of being outed as undocumented, right? So if we could figure out a way to get mental health in those communities, where people are scared for their placement here in their home, their citizenship, it's going to continue in a downward spiral. But if we're looking at classrooms and things of that nature, we need to get mental health in there, y'all. We need to write to your legislators, to your congressmen, to your council people that we need to get mental health. We need to address mental health, because honestly, that's where it all starts. It all starts and ends in mental health.
Right.
Right. And it's funny that we were talking about earlier, how some people will look at you differently for sharing coping mechanisms.
Right.
It kind of, it sheds the light that more people are on the opposite side of that healthy spectrum than are on the healthy side. That's the normal is the unhealthy, and we gotta change that narrative.
Right.
Yeah, and the good thing, that's why we're here talking about it. Like, a lot of poverty areas, they just don't believe in it. They don't believe in coping strategies. They don't know what it look like, because they say it's hard to have morals and values when you start. That's the main. It's like, and it's hard to do right under them circumstances. So that's why we're here talking about it today. That's what Mental Health in the Hood is about, bringing that awareness, letting people talk and feel good about talking about things that they don't want to get out. It's beautiful, because at the end of the day, it can help somebody. And that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to help people and to bring them some type of peace in their life and understand that they're not alone, and we all go through some of the similar things.
And I think, too, just adding to what Ali said, another reason why, another thing that can be added to the mental health services in terms of support is that it has to be a representation of the people they're serving.
Yeah.
They need more people that are minority, that are in the mental health profession, to make more people feel like it is okay. Some of the things are very systemic and set up in a way that brings that fear, that brings that anxiety, or takes away the ability to want to reach out and get support and want to reach out and get help. Like, for example, I, as an African American, I have had family members that say, "Why are you going to therapy? You don't need therapy." Like, what, and they tell their kids that.
Right.
So to come out of that mindset of coming from a family that always told me, like, therapists are not something that we need, it's just like, well, how do you become an adult and still go behind them and say, this is what I'm doing for me, regardless of what you did for yourself, without everybody looking at you a certain type of way.
Right.
So I think there needs to be more cultural implementation and consciousness and competence. And I would say there also is a lot of systemic things that are the overarching leaders of these institutions that we don't control, or people that we don't see, that add to the reason why a lot of these people don't feel like these services are accessible. Because I think a lot of people don't know about support groups. I think support groups shouldn't be something you do as an adult. We should have support groups while we're in school.
Yeah.
You know, that's why a lot of mental health organizations, we do a lot of group counseling and a lot of life skill groups or self-esteem groups for girls, because we have to start that culture of talking about things very young. We have to put those things in the school, because if not, when they become older, that will not make them want to access services that they don't relate to or understand,
or they don't even know exist. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
So just to give some more education, while traumatic experiences frequently involve life-threatening events, any situation that leaves one feeling alone and completely overwhelmed can be traumatic, even without physical harm. It's important to remember that it's not the objective facts of the event alone that determine how traumatic an event is. It is also the subjective emotional experience of the event. Often, the more terror and helplessness one feels, the more likely it is that individual will be traumatized. So, objective point of view is more about a macro perspective, how generally people think about a certain issue, crisis, or event. But subjective is more about that one's personal feelings towards that actual traumatic event or crisis. So we just want to basically provide that information there.
Yes.
So as we move forward, we have our announcements, and we want to thank Ali for coming on the show. We appreciate your courage and your bravery and wanting to come out and do this with us. So as we move forward, we have our next Zoom meetup that is going to be happening Wednesday, August 19th at 7 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. The access code for our Zoom meetings are always on our social media accounts at Mental Health in the Hood on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Tell a friend, bring a friend. That is our philosophy. Yes. Then we have a new addition, which is our workout, which is called Call to Action, which will be happening Sunday, August 23rd at 9 o'clock a.m. And basically, we're coming together for a good cause. We're not only coming together to work out, but we're also going to be calling action to a lot of the criminal and systemic injustices that have happened amongst our people, and minority. When I say our people, I don't mean just African American people.
Right.
I mean everyday people.
Everyday people.
Season 2, episode 3, that will be posted Sunday, August 30th at 9:00 a.m. So please subscribe and tap in so that you can get that notification on your phone. And then how to support us, right? Make sure that you follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Mental Health in the Hood. It is uniform across all platforms, so as long as you put that in, it should pop up. It should be a black and white logo. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel. When you go to YouTube, type in the Mental Health Show, and we will be one of the top videos because we are just growing and flowing because of you guys. So make sure you click that subscribe button. Thank you for tapping in, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyday people.